Rigged. The whole thing is rigged. It's rigged. I'm telling you, it's rigged. It's rigged. Against me, it's rigged. The whole thing. No. Look, here's the thing, man. Right? Can polls be wrong? Can polls be purposely skewed a certain way? Sure. Can multiple dozens of polls from independent, companies be polled, all be rigged? Is that possible in the realm of all possibilities? Is that possible? Sure. All I ask is that you show me how they're rigged. That's all I ask. If you're going to make a claim like that, then prove it. Right? You can't. You see, we live in an age where people are just being lazy, and they just don't want to bother. They don't want to bother with anything. Yeah, it's all rigged. It all doesn't matter. It's all predetermined. It doesn't matter anyway. I'm done. Right? It's easy to do that. Anybody could do that. I could do that right now, and I'm done. Right? But here's the thing. Right? Donald Trump's being a crybaby. When a poll came out today where he's doing good in Florida, all of a sudden he's all about the polls. Oh, a poll has me up, people. See? You say you can't pick and choose when you can't be for the polls when you're winning and then be against the polls when you're losing. That's not the way it works. He's being a fucking crybaby. That's what he's being. Come on. It's the truth. Now, here's the thing. Right? This is not for the people that are already convinced that it's rigged, and because you're already convinced in your ways, right? Deep down, you're not right, but it's just a convenient, lazy way out. But here's the thing, right? The whole oversampling thing that I keep hearing. I keep hearing people tell me, look, man, they're polling more Democrats than Republicans. I'm not sure what you guys think that means exactly. Right? Let me tell you how a poll does not work. All right? They don't poll 3,000 people, right? And of those 3,000, determine just directly who's winning in that state. Now, that's not the way the poll works. All right? If you think so, for example, if you poll 3,000 people, 3,000, let's say over 2,000 of them are Democrat and 1,000 are Republican, right? They're not taking that into account. They're not putting that into the polling. It's a scientific polling. They come out and say, yeah, Hillary's winning. Look at this. Even though, she's barely winning by 5 points, even though 30% more Democrats were polled. How about that, huh? You know what that means? That means that if it was even, she'd be losing by 20 points, and that's how she's really going to lose. No, that's not what it means. Hold your horses, right? You need to know how the methodology works. They release their methodology. You could look into the methodology and say, yeah, I don't know, I don't like the way they did that, and they all do it in different ways, right? And you could look at the methodology. You could say, I don't agree with that methodology. And that's perfectly fine, but you still have to explain why, regardless of which poll you're looking at, even the ones that are favorable to Trump, why in every single one of these polls you see the traditional bumps, okay, during conventions, the traditional bumps, debates, etc., right? You still see that trending there. The trending is still there, regardless of which poll you're looking at. Difference of the actual result. Right, but let me kind of explain to you how polling works here. I'm going to try my best, right? Now, I'm not a pollster myself, so there's people that can actually explain this a lot better than me, but I'm going to go ahead and give it a shot, okay? I'm actually going to give this shit a shot, right? So let's say that in any given state, right? Let's say the state of Texas, right? Let's just go with the state of Texas where I'm from. In the state of Texas, right? When you look at what are the Democratic counties and the Republican counties, right? A lot of the Republican counties are very small. They're small towns. And historically, when you look at elections, many of them, it's almost 100%, all right? They've been voting for the Republican, right? It's very one-sided, very lopsided. 100%, like all those little red counties, you know, it's only a couple hundred or just a little over 1,000, but just universally, they're voting almost unanimously for Republicans. Very little need. You still want to poll them to get an idea, but there's no need to do an additional 1,000 calls to these people when you know generally how they're going to vote. Generally, how many of them are going to vote, and you may want to do calls to see if there's any shifts there, and you may want to do calls to see how many of them are motivated to go out and actually vote. When a big controversy comes out, okay, you know what, let's go ahead and do more calls to these certain locations, these little counties. Let's see if there's any change here. But if they call 1,000 small counties and all but maybe 2 at best are coming out and say, nah, I'm still going to vote for the Republican, no need to do an additional 3,000 calls. There's no need for it. There's no need to keep polling Republicans in these small counties when you know already that the trending is there. You already know. Furthermore, a lot of the Democratic counties are big. They're big cities. Austin, Texas, El Paso, Texas. Right? When you go to Dallas, Houston, right? They're bigger. They're cities. They're more diverse. There's even Republicans there are more diverse in the small towns, right? So you're gonna have to poll them too, right? But the Democrats in some of these counties, right? If you ever look at a map, an electoral map, there's very little blue, but there's red all over Texas, right? And those few locations that are blue, though, those are big cities, right? You know, they're very big cities there. Right? Only very few small counties, and they're actually in the southern border, all the way across Brownsville. They're blue. Those are really small towns, but even Brownsville is kind of big compared to some of these red counties. But nonetheless, all right, even though they're Democratic, some of them, take El Paso, where I'm from, for example, it's not 100%. It's not universal, right? So it's still it tilts from election to election. It's not 100% across the board. It can be 1 year, it could be 60%, another year 65%, another year 70%, another year it could be just 55%, right? As far as how many are going to vote Democrat. You got to poll more of them to understand what's going on, to get to kind of, when you look at the methodology, right? The more that you poll, the better idea you get. It's more complicated. It just is. What is it that you guys don't understand about that? Now, it's not like they're hiding it. They tell you we polled this many Democrats. We called this many of them, right? It's not to skew the percentages. That's not what it is. When they factor in the polling, when they factor it in, they still have to factor in the reality that this many Republicans are registered and likely to vote, right? And this is the percentage that they're voting this way. It's not how many they called. It's how you're looking at the percentage, at the ratio, and you're factoring that into the poll. It's not that complicated, is it? I really hope it's not that complicated. And it's the truth in a lot of other states, right? In Ohio, for example, in Pennsylvania, you got Philadelphia. Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, it's a lot more diverse. It's a lot bigger. It's a city. All right, you have to call a lot more people to gauge and get a better idea of, let's say Pittsburgh's going to be, for whatever reason, let's say Philadelphia is going to be blue. It's going to go for the Democrats, but it's not going to go 100% for the Democrats. You need to gauge: is it going to be 55%? Is it going to be 60%? How much of it is going to go to the Democrats? Right. So you have to gauge that. So you got to do a lot of calls for that. All the little small towns that are voting 90%, 80%, 100% in some cases, the real small towns, there's no need but to do a couple of calls for that. You already know that the Republicans are going to vote very universal, right, for their guy. That there's no need to do. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of time and energy, right? If you called enough people, you called enough people. That's it. In some other cases, right? If you're doing a national poll, right? And I've seen this happen a lot. Oh my God, look at all these minorities they called. They're skewing it. Not really. So, for example, like a rule of thumb, right? It's not a given. It's not like like a must per se, but it's always been like a goal for Republicans to get at least 40% of the Hispanic vote, right? Also, Trump's not going to win the African American vote, right? So keep those two minority groups in mind. Like, keep that in mind. Let's say you're a pollster and you do a national thing, right? You do thousands of calls, right? You call thousands of people from all over the nation, right? And a lot of times they already have the state by state, so they could just kind of gather it from there. But you want a clear view on the percentages. Like, there's not enough of a view with the minorities, right? There's not enough of a view. So let's say as a pollster, you want to know specifically, how is Donald Trump doing with Hispanics, right? Like, we want a better view of that, right? So you may do an additional 1,000 calls to Hispanics from across the nation to just specifically see what percentage he's going to fall in within Hispanics. The same with blacks. You call African Americans, right? An additional of them to get a better perspective of how they're going to be voting for that. It's not going to skew the poll. Because let's say, I'm just throwing out numbers here, but let's say that 10% of voters are going to be African American. Just because in the poll they called all the people they called was 30% of them, it doesn't mean that the poll is factoring in as if 30% of voters are going to be African American. That's not what that means. They're sampling that specific group, but once you get that ratio and that percentage, you're going to factor it into the percentage of the likely voters that are actually going to vote, right? Now, this is where the science gets complicated, right? And as a pollster, it's the methodology with many of them. They have their own philosophies and they do it differently in some cases, right? But some don't agree with others, etc. All right. So it's not. That's why they have this thing called the margin of error, right? And sometimes they can be way off. Sometimes it could be certain phenomena they're not aware of, right? And it catches them by surprise afterwards. But most of the time, the polls are pretty within the margin of error accurate most of the time, right? And that's just a reality, right? So can I find examples when the polls were just wrong? Sure. The polls were wrong in Iowa when they had Trump ahead of Ted Cruz, and he got his ass handed to him. He almost fell to third place. But the pollsters didn't take into account that Donald Trump had no fucking ground game, right? So there was a lot of people that wanted to vote for Trump that did not show up to vote in Iowa, right? To the caucus or whatever. They didn't show up, right? So a pollster had no control over that. Another example, Michigan. They had Hillary ahead in Michigan over Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders thrashed her there, right? And I think they missed the boat there. But all the other polls were spot on. The New York poll was right. The California poll was right. Okay, polls that had Bernie winning was right, right? Once they kind of caught on to that, they were spot on. The same thing with the Trump polls. After the Iowa one, the New Hampshire one was pretty spot on. They had him winning in Nevada. It was spot on. South Carolina, it was spot on. Throughout the South, they had him winning. It was spot on. They had him losing in Texas. It was spot on. Just saying. All right. So anyway, well, that's all. That's the only reason I want to do this video. Right. Anyway, it's just kind of, I think people need to understand how the polling works. I don't think people quite understand. So it could be, they could oversample with anything. Some pollsters do it differently with others, etc. But that's just the way it is. Right. Anyway, with that said, I'm out.